Okay, I think we've got a good group. So I will kick us off. Hi, everyone. My name is Katherine Goldberg. I am a senior fellow with the Net Zero Industrial Policy Lab at Johns Hopkins University. We're really excited to have a great set of speakers today to tell us more about Brazil's role in the global battery value chain. And before we start, a few housekeeping notes. The first is that we'll be recording this presentation. It'll be posted on our lab's YouTube channel after the session. So we would ask that you please stay on mute during the presentation. We will also have about 15 minutes of Q&A time at the end of the presentation. So please feel free to put questions into the chat box as the presentation goes along, or save them for the end, and we will get to them then. So we could move to the next slide, please. Before we get started, I wanted to give a little background on our lab, who we are and how we work. Our lab sits at the intersection of geopolitics, clean tech supply chains, and industrial strategy. So for us, what that means is that we focus on producing robust analysis and policy recommendations that can help countries and companies really strategically align their limited domestic resources with areas where they're most competitive across key green technology supply chains. Next slide, please. And we do this across 3 different work streams. So the first is our industrial base work stream. Last fall, this team launched our online model called the Clean Industrial Competitiveness Explorer. It models competitiveness in final product exports for 10 clean technologies across all countries. And we are updating this with additional technologies to be released later this year. The industrial base mapping work that team does also feeds directly into the value chain mapping that our researchers used in the Brazil analysis that you'll hear shortly. So just wanted to make that connection. Second, we have a global team that works across various multilateral energy and climate fora to inject ideas that help support strong industrial policy and alignment with various global frameworks. And this fall, our global team will launch a database of global clean technology foreign direct investment. We're really excited about that, and you'll all get an invitation for the launch if you're signed up for our newsletter. And Tim, maybe you could throw that link in the chat, please. And then finally, we have our regional team, which dives deeper into our priority countries. Right now, that's Brazil, India, and Mexico. We've been conducting a series of regional webinars on this work, and this webinar is the second in our regional series focused on Brazil. We held a first webinar in May on India, and we will hold another one this fall on Mexico. So now I will turn it over to Tim Sahai. Tim is one of the lab's co-founders and really instrumental to our Brazil work. Tim will frame the presentation and introduce our amazing experts. So Tim, over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you everyone for being here. It's a real pleasure to sort of show our preliminary results of our work on critical minerals in Brazil, and I'll introduce sort of the 3 authors who are here. We have a 4th author, Carolyn from E+, who is not here. So the first author is Felipe Dessa, who is a specialist in policy and industry at the National Confederation of Industry, and he's a mechanical engineer and a PhD candidate at ITA, working on industrial innovation and manufacturing. Next, we have Rodrigo Curi, who is an industry and policy analyst also at CNI, and he has a PhD in economics from Unicampi, and has experience in sustainable socioeconomic development. And last, we have the lab's Brazil expert, Renato de Gaspi, who's the senior research associate at NZIPL and has a PhD in political science from the Central European University. So I just sort of wanted to give sort of brief sort of framing remarks about how and why critical minerals have suddenly become more and more important to green industrial development, to critical mineral diplomacy, and to sort of value chain goals of countries to have sort of more domestic processing. And that context is that of an increasing sort of rivalry over strategic minerals, sometimes called critical minerals, and these refer to sort of different subsets of the main metals that are important for the energy transition. And as we've had sort of increasing rivalry, states have experimented with many, many different types of strategies to make sure that their own policy goals win out, which often include domestic control and not foreign control of these minerals. They often include production and value-added steps at home, and not just simply extraction steps. And in the case of United States and China, sort of an increasing weaponization of these metals, a policy of technology denial, and a policy of sort of metal denial to coerce countries towards other ends that are not necessarily to do with the energy transition, but are often linked to geopolitics and security goals of these countries. So in that, Brazil, as everyone who's attending here knows, has a huge amount of structural advantages. So we'll have sort of Felipe there. So let's talk a little bit about our report, sort of reserves, where Brazil has a lot of reserves with very little production in many of these metals. And and so that's been the main sort of challenge, and the goal of this report is to identify the spaces in which Brazil can increase its capture of these domestic value chains. And with that, I will pass it on to Renato.
Thank you, Tim. So the idea of this report, with all, like because of all this context that Tim said, critical minerals has become a very hot topic in Brazil and in the world. And we decided that, the three institutions that are here, authoring this report today, plus the Energy Transition Institute, National Confederation of Industry, and the Net Zero Industry Policy Lab, we had complementary technical capabilities. So the idea of this report is to be something that maps what Brazil is good at doing, maps what Brazil needs to do to become good at the other value-added steps of the chain, and to have this understanding also with the private sector's input in a way. This again is a preliminary report, and then the next step, as Rodrigo is going to mention a little bit later, is to do interviews also with the private sector. So this is basically the idea on doing a report that can actually tell how Brazil can take advantage of its mineral endowments, right? The main challenge today for Brazil is basically twofold. So the first challenge for Brazil to take more advantage of its endowments is expanding the conversion of geological reserves into effective production. This is not news, right? So there's a very good recent report launched by IPEA, by the Institute for Applied Economic Research in Brazil, authored by Rafael Leão and co-authors, that shows that basically Brazil, even though it does have reserves, even though it explores these reserves, it still underexplores those reserves. But the second and perhaps most crucial point is what to do with those reserves once you have explored them. As we all know, mineral exploration has costs, environmental costs, social costs, and it also has benefits. But to increase the benefits of your mineral extraction, you do need to add value in the country to get what we all know: better jobs, better economic complexity, and also nowadays, some hold sovereignty for the country. So what the report does is it identifies opportunities and limitations across 5 segments of the battery chain. I'll go into that in a second. But distinguishing where Brazil already competes, where its position is basically being born now, it has some seeds of a comparative advantage, and where structural challenges remain deepest, especially in the final stages of production. Whoever is familiar with the battery value chain in Brazil knows that cases such as Moura and WEG point to these possibilities for industrial insertion, but knows that these are specific niches and not necessarily something widespread in the country. Another aspect that we don't get to in the report at length, but it should be noticed, is that Brazil right now is having an international strategy for its critical minerals. So there is a critical mineral diplomacy going on, Sabri has done a report recently on this as well, and Brazil is diversifying its partners in the middle of this US-China rivalry for, well, three main, quite obvious reasons. First, secure offtake from foreign firms for Brazilian minerals, but also in terms of technology transfer uh, to increase the know-how inside of Brazil on how to add value to these metals. And then finally, because Brazil will not be able to produce all the equipments that it will need for this value add, especially in the first stages of production, international cooperation is going to be essential. Now, we do have a few examples of this. So the one of the most advanced ones, of course, is the Serra Verde USA rare earths example. There is also a project with the EU, especially with France backing Viridi's Minas Gerais mine, and there is FINEP and BNDES money on this. And there are also MOUs being signed between Brazil and China, Brazil and India, Brazil and South Korea very recently. It was, I think, on Monday that the South Korean president was in Brazil. And look, there are many possible criticisms of these agreements, and a lot of this remains to be seen whether this is going to be beneficial for the country or not. But the fact of the matter is that Brazil is a big part of the Brazilian strategy is to have an international insertion in international partnerships with these critical minerals. And I think the actual format that this is going to take is going to depend a lot on the policy that Brazil is going to do. Right now, what Brazil is doing is using its position as a large reserve of critical minerals, a large potential extractor of critical minerals, to negotiate a few partnerships. And this has brought some fruit, but what's going to come after this is remains to be seen. Now I'm going to pass it along to Felipe so he can talk about the Brazilian reserves.
Okay, so first I would like to thank you, Renato, team, Catherine, on behalf of CNI. For us, it's important to start this discussion in terms of the critical minerals, not on the point of view of only exploring the resource that we have, but also to adding value here on the local industry. So this type of event, this type of discussion for us, it's very well seen here inside of CNI. Okay, so as Renato was saying, on this report specifically, we are working with the batteries manufacturing chain. So he will further detail a little bit more of what we consider here the upstream, the midstream, and downstream. But here on this map, on this slide that you are seeing, we bring a lot of the upstream that basically corresponds here to the mining sector. So here we highlight on a public database that we have here on Brazilian government, what are the active mineral deposits here in Brazil. Of course, only on the mineral that are currently part of what we consider here the manufacturing chain of the batteries. So we have here aluminum, copper, iron, phosphate, graphite, lithium, manganese, nickel, and cobalt. So here you can see a little bit more of how these minerals are spread into Brazil. Brazil is a large country with a huge area. So once we say, okay, Brazil has critical minerals, where are those minerals? So here we can see a little bit more of how is this spread on the map. So I will highlight just a few points. So on this slide we have the north region, which basically corresponds to in terms of the mining sector, most with Pará state and Amapá state. Pará is a state that historically has invested a lot on the mining. We have lots of iron deposits. Here we have also copper, aluminum. Aluminum has grown a lot on the last years. We have explored a little bit more of our production. If Renato, I think you are on the slides, right? You can go to the next one. On the northeast, we have basically lots of states here, but most with Bahia state. I believe that a little bit more to the northeast, we have also copper and phosphate mineral deposits. And then south of Bahia, here we have a little bit more of nickel and cobalt. And here it's important to say that we are highlighting both nickel and cobalt since they are basically lots of correlated. So cobalt mineral deposit comes along, of course, in minor percentage from the extraction of nickel. So we have on south of Bahia lots of these mineral being extracted. Okay, so moving on to the next one. Uh, we have Southeast and Center-West. So basically on Minas Gerais, which is also a state that historically has had lots and lots of deposit minerals. So basically iron. And on the last few years, we have discovered there what we call the Lithium Valley on the north of Minas Gerais and also the south of Bahia state, which is that light green dot that you see on the map. So in terms of the lithium, we have acted in kind of fast. So basically, we have discovered these reserves and also explored and started to produce the lithium. And basically, we have developed this ecosystem to startups and companies to enjoy these benefits that we have grown on this land. So lithium, you will see in the next slide, that is basically being consolidating in terms of the exploration here. And okay, so in the last slide, we have seen a little bit about the spread of these mineral deposits. And here we are seeing not only how these mineral deposits are being produced, but what was the growth on the last 4 years. So x-axis is the share of global production today, and y-axis is the growth in Brazilian production. So as I said, the upper point here, I think it's mistranslated, but is lithium. So lithium has grown a lot, like 320 percent points above the global average of production, comparing Brazil to worldwide production. But we have also not so good performances on a few minerals. For instance, nickel. Nickel, although we have relevant reserves, our production has grown 50 percent points less than the average uh, of the global average, sorry. And this is very important because we saw that the nickel is very important for most of manufacturing chains, especially for the batteries, and of course also graphite is the same point. Manganese is very important for us as well, because here we need to see from a point of view not only about the production but also the demand projection. And when we see the demand projection of the batteries, we have seen a lot, for instance, on manganese. Manganese has grown a lot, will be growing a lot on the next year because the chemicals of the batteries are changing and changing by reducing, for instance, cobalt demand, because cobalt is very, very localized on few countries, for instance, Congo, which has more than 70% of the production globally. And we know that this is a strategic risk. So we are exploring a little bit more of other chemicals. So manganese is one example. Nickel is always important. Copper as well. Copper has a growing demand as well, but as it is already a consolidated market, a projection changing here in terms of percent is not like a large variation, but as it is already a large market, any change there will be impacting a lot. So copper is also an important metal in terms of future demands globally. Okay, so what I wanted to summarize here, the message is Brazil has the resources. Here, what I've shown to you is not yeah, it's not what needs to be explored again. This is already explored. We need to focus on the production, on the strategy for the future demands here. So this is specifically for the batteries manufacturing chain, but also for others that we all know that will be very important on the next years. Okay, so Renato, I think this is it.
Yeah, so on this note, I think like having the reserve information is important just to know like what Brazil can develop in the upstream as a country. But what we're concerned about is, first of all, we selected the battery value chain just because we needed a value chain to map, right? We needed to understand the steps of the value chain first, and we need to pick one. And so we picked basically the biggest one for critical minerals right now. And so just so our public understands, the NZIPL has developed as a lab a mapping of the entire value and supply chains and the production chains for 10 green technologies. I think we're expanding that at some point by the end of the year. But we have done this for the past 2 years, and this has been a two-step methodology. So first of all, we mapped the supply and process chain for each technology. This tapped into the lab's expertise and also Johns Hopkins expertise more broadly, in the sense that there's a lot of engineering expertise at Johns Hopkins, and we relied on that as well to map what are the products that make the chain happen. And then we mapped each material component and capital good to its corresponding 6-digit HS code, so we can map this onto trade data, which is again, we all know, I think we have many Brazilians here that know the limitations of trade data, but also the importance of having comparability between countries, and this is definitely the best one we have. And we, differently from others, I think the main difference here of our mapping has been putting these HS codes and these products into 5 functional segments. So not just looking whether something is upstream or downstream, but putting this into segments like raw material, processing equipment, which I think is the biggest difference in the sense of looking at the machines that make this and looking at the capital goods that are making this, as also an important part of the production process, and then product components, and then final products, right? So we capture all the vital elements of the chain and include the equipment. And what gives us a common basis to compare global structure with the country's specialization and the country's import dependence, which we've done for Brazil, across all 5 segments of the chain. And then we can target more specialized policy recommendations, which is the idea until the non-preliminary version of this report is done, right? So just so you understand the 5 segments here, we have here 13 products in raw material alone, and here you can see that it's all like the metal themselves, the reserves that we talked about. And then we move on to processed material. You look at cathode active materials and so on and so forth. So if you take lithium, for example, you would go from lithium to cathode active materials to the machines, and then finally to current collectors, and then to lithium ion batteries, right? So you can map this into upstream and downstream if you like, but it is interesting to look at by the segments themselves. And with that, we were able to look at what Brazil already has and what Brazil has to develop more specifically. So right now, the place that Brazil holds in the global mineral to battery market is one that probably is not very surprising, but I think there are a few findings here which are kind of new. So first of all, in final products, in terms of global structure, we have absolute Chinese leadership in this. Again, not news. The market shows very high concentration. The way we measured concentration was by employing a Hershman-Herfindahl index, which we employed into global structure and into the dependence of imports. I'll get to that in a second. In terms of specialization, only 7 of 122 countries mapped show revealed comparative advantage higher than 1. Notably, Hungary and Poland and other economies which are integrated into global automotive value chains. Hungary and Poland is also not very surprising in the sense that they are integrated into the EU value chains, but you can map this onto other hubs of automotive production. and Brazil shows an extremely low RCA, the lowest by far of all the 5 segments. In terms of dependence, Brazilian imports are heavily concentrated in China. We did another Hirschman-Herfindahl here, and here Brazilian dependence is almost complete on China in the sense that most of our imports are concentrated in one source. This is important, of course, because in terms of partner diversification, we are looking at partner diversification right now for pretty much every single value chain. When you have too much dependence on one country, you are pretty much in trouble, right? Brazil's position in this, in summation, is incipient. There are few relevant companies in the country, like Moura and VEG, as I said, but there are very few and far between. Now, in terms of components, the good news is that exports are relatively distributed across multiple countries when you look at the aggregate. Of course, a few countries have dominance of a few of the components, right? But when you look at the basket, it is quite diversified. Electrolytes and chemical products account for the largest share of the basket. In this, this already shows in the specialization. So 25 of 128 countries have RCA over 1. Brazil is in the median there. The median is around 0.22. And Brazil, of course, doesn't have a real comparative advantage on this, but it is kind of in the median. In terms of dependence, Brazilian imports are not very concentrated. So we don't see a big vulnerability here. We could diversify our partnerships. And we see a nascent position for Brazil here for the components of the battery. In terms of processing equipment and capital goods, it is a kind of a similar picture in the sense of the Brazilian RCA and its specialization, but and the global market has low concentration, but a few technologically advanced countries such as Germany, China, the US, Japan, and South Korea, so the big manufacturers of capital goods, are the ones that lead. And although this aggregate basket is not concentrated, there are certain critical dependencies in very specific equipment, especially by China and Germany. And then Brazil starts getting competitive when we get to the things that are more, well, upstream in this value chain, if you want to talk about it like this. In terms of processed material, Brazil already has comparative advantage, and exports show low aggregate concentration. Brazil is one of the few countries that is kind of a heavyweight in this, but Brazil's specialization is very concentrated on a few of the products of these processed materials. This also happens in raw materials, with Brazil being very high, having a very high RCA, very competitive. But in this, Brazilian imports show moderate concentration because we have dependence on phosphorus from Egypt and propylene from China and certain specific mineral inputs. What we see in this whole scenario is basically that, well, while Brazil does kind of well in raw material and processed material, we have seeds of something going on there. There's a lot of work to be done if we are to climb into the more downstream parts of the value chain. And this maps onto well as well on the Brazilian deindustrialization story. Brazil has deindustrialized massively, of course. Everybody here kind of knows that. And it has deindustrialized especially on losing chemical capacity and capacity on producing capital goods. So it's really not surprising that we are in this position right now. So in this sense, after we have this diagnosis, I think we can start thinking about public policies. And here, before Rodrigo starts talking about this, I want to make clear that this part of the job is now going to be done in having interviews with stakeholders. So from now on, now that we have this diagnosis, which is kind of specific, we can now start validating this diagnosis and understanding the public policy needs moving forward. So I'm going to pass it on to Rodrigo now so he can talk about the public policies that we're mapping.
Okay, thank you, Renato. Hi, everyone. I want to first thank you, Catherine and team, for the opportunity to talk here and the Net Zero Policy Lab. So, as Renato showed, we have a huge challenge here to advance in our value chain. And this challenge is, in order to fulfill this challenge, we need public policy. We need all stakeholders to participate and pursue a same goal. And for that, since the investment is long-term investment, and we have a lot of needs for institutionality here, we choose to work a little bit on the policies. So we divide the policy in three main groups: the regulatory policies, the R&D initiatives, and the funding, the financial and funding necessities. So for the regulatory policy, the highlight here is the National Policy on Critical and Strategic Minerals that is in the Brazilian Senate right now. It's a regulatory framework, extensive regulatory framework that leads the discussion right now. So brings a definition of what is strategic, what is critical minerals, brings the institutionalization of the National Council for the Industrialization of Critical and Strategic Minerals. So it's a council that is gonna define what the list of critical and regulatory minerals, and there's a lot of other responsibilities. The bill brings the financial benefits, the credit benefits. So it's a very extensive bill. So I can share with you guys. I don't know if there's a translation for English, but now it is in the discussion in the Federal Senate, and there's a expectation that in this year it's gonna pass and transform into a law. So for the second group is the R&D initiatives that I want to highlight here. The Magbras Brazil is an initiative that it's leading by Senai, National Development is a Brazilian institution that is kind of constructing the whole value chain for permanent magnets. So since the raw material to the final products, they are starting to construct the production of all this value chain, and it's a very nice example of how to bring public policy and financial institutions with national enterprise and national companies. It's located in Lagoa Santa, Minas Gerais, and there's other initiatives in CETEM, but this is the main one that we can highlight now. And the financial, I think, is the kind of weakest point that we have here is the financial and funding, because capital here in Brazil it's very expensive and it's hard to get competitive credit for such a scale investments. So, but we have some initiatives mainly from BNDES. It's our National Development Bank that launched the participation funding here to strategic minerals equity investment fund. So it's mainly funding to initiatives of transforming processing minerals. So, but I think we can advance more and bring more the private sector to this initiatives. Can you pass on that, please? So the conclusion of this preliminary work is that we have a twofold structural lag here. We need to bring our reserves into production. We have a lot of reserves, but not a lot of production of these minerals. So this is one challenge, and the second challenge is advancing the value chain. And this is strategic challenge because involves a lot of segments, and what you want to do in this work actually is not like complete this battery chain, value chain here in Brazil, all the production, but to define what is the hotspot, which segments of the chain are the best segments for us to bring into the society and bring real conditions for us to evolve in the value chain. So I think that's the main purpose of this study too. And for this challenge, there's a lot of limitations. there's a lot of heterogeneity in this value chain. The technology is changing very fast, and there's a lot of competitors. The geopolitics now is kind of all, as Renato says, it's a hot theme. All the countries are looking at this right now, and but it's what we want to do. And after we kind of see these hotspots, this segments that it's better for us to invest. Uh, uh, what we want to do is like identifying the how the policy can contribute with that, how the public policy in Brazil can contribute to reach that goal. Limitations of the study, I think the main one is we look mainly on foreign exchange, foreign trade to understand the value chain and in which point Brazil is positioned. So there's a lack of understanding in the study of internal capacities here in Brazil, industrial systems, employment, even our R&D here that can re-evaluate how Brazil is positioning in the value chain. So I think one limitation is data that we can improve in our study to understand what activities here in Brazil is not captured by foreign trade, and that is important for us in the study. And also advance more in the recycling, the circular economy, this after the downstream, like we mainly maybe for other studies we can introduce that in the understanding of the value chain that we use as a reference for the study. Can you pass on that, please? So as was pointed out here, for now, the continuing of the studies to do semi-structured interviews with the main stakeholders of this value chain for from the private sector and also from the public sector, and to understand the state of art of the policy here in Brazil right now, and in which way we can advance, how they are understanding, how they are looking to these challenges and where they want to act and the limitations that they see. This is a very important part of the study. It's gonna kind of also bring us more clarity about what we did since what we did right now, and understand better in which way we have to concentrate our focus. And also, as I said, deepening our capacity. Deepening our understanding of which activities are not captured by foreign trade, and concentrating our efforts on that too. So thank you so much for your presence here. I hope my English was not very I hope my English is understandable actually. And I pass to Catherine right now.
It was great. Just one minor thing. So first of all, thank you for everybody for coming. If you want to access the preliminary report, which is in Portuguese, the QR code is right there. The final version will come in October. It will be in English and Portuguese. And if you signed up for the webinar, basically you'll receive. So yeah, well, we're very excited for the next stage of the research.
Thanks so much, Rodrigo and Felipe and Renato. This was really excellent. And now I would like to open it up for questions. It looks like we've already got one in the chat. So I'll read that one and encourage others, please pop them into the chat. So we have one. First question is, what are the linkages between batteries and the EV transition in Brazil? Are the industrial policies instituted by the government interlinked across the two sectors? And second question is, what are some data points that you'd like to access that are key to this project, but currently unavailable and difficult to access? Great questions. Maybe we could start with the EV and batteries link. If one of our presenters wants to take that one.
I can take that one. So I think like Brazil's understanding of batteries right now, like up until this point, it was very much focused on the EV transition, and I think the EV transition has been quicker in Brazil than some people thought. Maybe um, with that said, there's a lot still. There's a lot of like cars which are hybrid, which means that you have less demand for minerals, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it is a complicating factor, right? So I think the main linkage that I would put is that there is a bit of maybe an uncertainty as to how big is the scale of the demand for minerals in Brazil for batteries. I think that's a point. If Felipe and Rodrigo wants to correct me, that's fine. But I think I'm on the mark here. And then I think that the industrial policies that are being instituted by the government are interlinked across the two sectors. You have many programs which are for the EV sector in Brazil, right? So, and this has been the history of Brazil. Brazil is a country that even when it doesn't have industrial policy, it has some kind of industrial policy for automotive. So that's a good thing in the sense that since batteries are so linked to the automotive sector, it means that it will always have some kind of a policy. Now, if this policy is tailor-made for batteries and for mineral value addition, that's a point that I'm not 100% sure. And I think maybe the next stage of the Mover program, for example, the next stage of the policies for bus electrification in Brazil need to take more care onto adding local content in the battery system itself. And it can happen in any of the segments that we showed. It can also happen in the software part. It could happen in many places, but some kind of value addition inside of the battery systems themselves would be quite important in my opinion.
Renato, can I just compliment?
Of course.
Uh, I just read, I think this week, that Brazil is the world's largest importer of Chinese EV. So we have a huge market here, and the scale is very big. So I think it's definitely connected. But I also want to highlight that we we also have a lot of potentiality in the battery energy storage systems, the BESS, that we produce a lot of sustainable energy, mainly on solar panels, and this is actually even a problem here in Brazil because there's a kind of excess of supply at some times of the day, and we need to manage that. So the if we can storage this energy that produced here in Brazil with BES and also link this market with the production here in Brazil, there's a market potentiality here, and we can use this technology for that too. And also highlight here the message from Jackson Detoni from ABDI, that he said we need to make progress in Brazil connecting mineral strategy with industrial policy. This is fundamental to avoiding the natural resource trap and preventing common leakage. So just highlight this importance of bringing together the private initiative and the industrial policy.
Yeah, if I could just sort of add one thing, exactly what Renato was saying is that there is a storage battery that is acting as a demand on batteries and battery minerals. Then there are automotive batteries that are acting as a demand pull. And so the idea for linking the EV industrial policy with the battery industrial policy is kind of being carried out by BNDES in collaboration with sort of two big firms that are Brazilian giants in making batteries, which are Mora and Weggy that Renato mentioned, both of whom have active production hubs for batteries. So they are currently making storage batteries and automotive batteries. Those automotive batteries are going into, they're going in cars in the BYD cars in Bahia. They're going into Stellantis cars in Pernambuco, and they're going into electric buses and municipal buses that these firms are supplying. So that's sort of a part of the value added step in batteries. But this is coming on, you could call sort of downstream from the final assembly stage, going sort of adding value on the battery management systems, on the assembly part and the electronics part and the software part, etc. They're not sort of adding value to the cathode materials or to the anode materials that we are talking about here. But that is a sort of a profitable, relevant part of the battery battery value chain. And the second part that sort of Renato was alluding to is that we have a hybrid strategy in Brazil, where BNDES and the MOVER EV industrial policy is pushing on hybrids. And when you have a hybrid, you basically have two automotive batteries, two lithium batteries inside them, not the 24 to 36 batteries that you would have in a 100% battery electric vehicle. So the EV is not acting as a big enough demand pull for domestic batteries, but what is going to act as a demand pull by 2030 in the projections is going to be those storage batteries. So Brazil still has enough sort of leeway to get a big domestic market to add value into.
Thanks for the really in-depth response to that question. I wanted to pick up a next question, kind of two questions tied together, which is around the access to data point. The first question we had is, what are some data points that you'd like to access that are key to this project, but currently unavailable or difficult to access? And then further down, we have a related comment, which is around the lack of knowledge about Brazil's subsoil and whether that hurts potential assessments of how to get more integrated into battery supply chains and others. So I'm wondering if our presenters have views on that kind of lack of data question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I can start here with the data question. For this work, we are basically using two main sources of data, which is the mineral deposits and also the trade, international trade. I would not say like there is some difficulty or some unavailability because Brazil is in fact a country that has lots and lots of data for many sectors, including mine. However, the process itself of discovering a new deposit, starting to exploring it and starting to, okay, this deposit here is feasible both technically and economically to explore and start to produce. This is like a very dynamic process, you know. Me and Rodrigo, we were in this morning with the president of our Institute of Mining here in Brazil, and he told for every 1,000 mineral deposits that you start to do this kind of feasibility study, one, you really go deep into like starting to produce. So this creates a lot of difficulty in terms of the own mapping and of this data. But for this work specifically, we are using public reports that are from Brazilian government. So this is very spread. It's easy information to get. So this is not, I would say, this is not difficult for this point. But the process itself of starting the exploration and start producing. And about the mapping, I don't know if Rodrigo wants to complement me, but we had this discussion early on this project that, yeah, in fact, Brazil is not like 100% explored for obvious reasons. We have like here Amazon forest and other forests as well. But we have decided in the beginning of the discussions that we would not go into this topic because this is a huge discussion itself. So what we presented here was the available resources that we have explored that are currently feasible to be produced. But we understand that this is in fact a difficulty, and this is in fact some point that needs to be discussed. But my message here in this presentation is that, okay, Brazil already has explored a little bit of this soil, and there are resources that are mapped, so we can use these kind of resources.
Yeah, and just complement, I think it's a very important issue. Uh, and we also here in CNI, we also are concerned about this this question, and we think maybe the industrial policy can, we even made a suggestion for the actually the mainly industrial policy that is occurring here in Brazil to expand, to give more resources to expand this geological uh, mapping. So definitely it's an important question that can map a lot of potentialities that we don't know right now here in Brazil. And of course, uh, understand what uh, where these minerals are positioning and how's the environmental and regulatory limitations for the exploration of these minerals.
Thanks both for that response. I think we've got time for one more question. And there's a very timely one in the chat about the connection between critical minerals and the rapid growth of data centers. So, wondering, the question is, could the expansion of the rapid growth of data centers become a significant driver of demand for critical minerals and create an opportunity for Brazil to position itself as a strategic supplier in the data center value chains? Great question.
I mean, I can start on this one. I'm actually working on a mini snippet on inside of a different institution's report on data centers expansion in Brazil, and it's a very contested, politically contested topic. There are many people who think that data center is actually not a very good deal for Brazil, but the thing is, like, it becomes a good deal depending on what Brazil can do with it. And I think it can be a driver of demand for minerals in Brazil, unless all of the parts that are put inside of this data center are coming from abroad and refined abroad, and every single step is done abroad. Then no, probably, right? I mean, this report, of course, like, we're getting outside of the scope of the report. We made a very conscious decision of like doing, batteries. It was the one that we had mapped, etc. And I think could be a great future project actually for this partnership to focus on data centers, and I think it's a low-hanging fruit. But in this sense, I think like the challenges are kind of similar in a way, right? Can it create demand, right, for minerals in Brazil? Can it create an anchor of demand for Brazilian products? It definitely can. But I think you do need a policy for this, because I think like if it is hard to internalize the components of a battery, it's going to be not just as hard, but I think much harder to do the same for certain AI components. Not for all of it, but for certain AI components. And Brazil does have a semiconductor policy, for example, which has been dotted with continuities and discontinuities. It had some successes with SEITEC, for example, and then the SEITEC was discontinued, and there's a big political debate over that. But I think there is one way that Brazil could take advantage of the AI boom and the data center boom, and that's also through internalizing certain parts of the value chain. So like in a way, it is a similar response to a much different question, in the sense of like using Brazil's minerals not just as minerals but as levers of industrial development. And I think that's the answer is basically the same but with different implications.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
just sort of say one thing on that. It's really every sector has its own sort of global ecosystem and global market. So in this study, for example, we did a lot of work to find out what is Brazil's specialization opportunity, what is its current RCA in these sectors, and what is its diversification opportunity, etc. Right? So you really need to map it with respect to a particular industrial value chain, and batteries was the big one that we chose here. A future study or other people who are working on Brazil's semiconductor strategy will find, a completely different sort of global position for Brazil. Brazil has a budding electronic sector. Again, after decades of sort of deindustrialization, it's a chemical sector that was hollowed out in Brazil that is posing sort of difficulties in adding value to batteries. And in semiconductors, it's the electronic sector that was never really fully established in Brazil to begin with, so it didn't really deindustrialize as much. But there is a budding electronics manufacturing sector in Manaus, in the free trade area, etc., where there's a lot of electronics sort of firms that are partnering with Korean and Japanese firms to be a part of the semiconductor sort of strategy. So that's what I mean by like doing these kinds of studies requires you to know the sector's position of the country in a global sort of market.
Yeah, just one quick comment here as well. Just as Renato told, there would be like a need for another study, like the batteries manufacturing chain just for semiconductors. But in parallel to that, we are being consulted here on CNI for different propositions of law that are arriving in terms of data centers and semiconductors as well. And we just want to share that, of course, we have this concerning of not only installing the data center here, but also creating this demand, just as Renato told, to raising this this value chain of the semiconductors. And we know that it's very similar to the one that we are exploring here on this report, which is the battery chain. And we are aware of that, and we are bringing this and every consult that we are part of. Okay.
Thanks. And maybe a good possible project, as Renato said, for future collaboration. So I think this was a good question to end on. Thank you all so much for joining our webinar. This was really informative, and I just want to say a big thanks to our presenters, Felipe, Renato, Rodrigo, and Tim for his input. So stay tuned for our next webinar on Mexico later this fall, and for other news from our lab. And have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
everyone.
Bye bye.